We're Sainties.
St. Elizabeth University.
St. Elizabeth is the best kept secret in New Jersey. Here, turn your passion into your profession. St. E's has one goal: to support intelligent, determined young women and men, becoming the best people they are destined to be.
The power to learn.
The power to grow.
The power to succeed.
We're St. E's.
St. Elizabeth University. The power to soar.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you to St. Elizabeth University for another one of our speaker series, a lunch and learn event with the esteemed Rachel Stern. My name is Dr. Rich Quinlan. I am the director of the St. Elizabeth University Center for Holocaust and Genocide Education. And it is absolutely an honor today to host Rachel. She and I have gotten to know each other and work together a little bit over the past year. And she is the founder and director of the Fritz Ascher Society for Persecuted, Ostracized, and Banned Arts out of New York City. Her work is utterly phenomenal as she tells the stories of artists who were persecuted by the Nazis, including the individual that she will be discussing today, which is Fritz Ascher, and a new exhibit called Love and Betrayal. Rachel is coming to us from Germany today, which is incredibly exciting because now we can honestly say that we do international programming. This is great. So thank you to everyone who is here. It is always truly, truly meaningful that you take the time out to join us. And please check out St. Elizabeth University when you get a chance when we are done. But I am going to clear out of the way now and turn things over to the talent and the star of today's program, Rachel Stern.
Thank you so much, Richard, for your introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. So let me pull up the slideshow. There we go. Okay. The late expressionist Fritz Ascher, who lived in Berlin from 1893 until 1970, survived two world wars and persecution by the German National Socialists. In this presentation, I will focus mostly on works on paper created before 1933. Drawings are the most immediate and intimate artistic medium in which the artist captures his ideas or recent experiences, or reflects on pictorial themes or compositions. I will then talk about the years of persecution by the German Nazi regime, during which Ascher wrote poetry, and conclude with presenting the artwork he created after the defeat of the Nazi regime in 1945. Love and betrayal are the themes that seem to run like a common thread through Fritz Ascher's work. Lies, deception, and betrayal have the breach of trust in common. The person who is betrayed loses his footing because trust precedes betrayal. Basically, betrayal is also a breach of civilization, and that is what makes it so traumatizing. Civilization is a social order that largely regulates coexistence through boundaries, taboos, and laws, and is based on the tacit consent and trust of all. It is the result of centuries of development that has led to a canonization of the rules and is protected and empowered by the state organs. If the state changes the rules unilaterally, if physical integrity and the protection of human life are suddenly no longer guaranteed, then that is betrayal. An important theme in this context is the motif of the clown, which Fritz Ascher began to depict in 1916. Ascher's first graphics on the subject refer to the opera I Pagliacci, composed by Ruggero Leoncavallo, which premiered in Milan in 1892 and comes from the repertoire of improvisational theaters. The focus is on the performance of a troupe of comedians in which acting and reality merge, and the main character, Canio, who had found out about his wife's infidelity just before the performance, stabs his rival Silvio and his wife Nedda on stage. The opera enjoyed great popularity, not at least because the main character, Canio, was sung by the successful tenor Enrico Caruso, including several times at the Berlin Opera. At the beginning of his artistic exploration are the graphite drawings that Ascher created in his sketchbook, perhaps during or immediately after the performances. Several show the actors within the limited stage space. The fact that sometimes 3 or 4 versions of a scene were shown together on one sheet of paper in what seems like great haste suggests that Ascher reacted very directly to what was happening on stage. Ascher explores the emotions of the clown with gesture and mimic expressivity at about the same time as artists like Max Beckmann, Marc Chagall, and Pablo Picasso. He stages the individual figure of Pagliaccio or clown, his otherness and his status as an outsider in the struggle of life and in existential loneliness. In Ascher's art, the clown becomes a synonym for the self. Before he could form such thoughts and depictions, Ascher was surrounded by love. It was a world in upheaval, characterized by rapid technical and industrial progress, rapid urbanization, and drastic social changes, into which Fritz Ascher was born on October 17, 1893 in Berlin, as the eldest child and only son of Jewish parents Hugo and Minna Luisa Ascher. Fritz's sisters Charlotte and Margarete were born in 1894 and 1897. From 1904, Hugo Ascher produced artificial tooth enamel with the Ascher GmbH company. The success of his company enabled the family to move into a villa at Niklasstraße 21-23 in Berlin-Zehlendorf in 1909. Built by the prominent architect Professor Paul Schulze-Naumburg. Supported by his father, Fritz Ascher left school that same year. Max Liebermann, the most influential artist in Berlin at the time, had recognized the talent of the 16-year-old after he had drawn portrait sketches of him. He recommended him for further training to the progressive Königsberg Art Academy, which was headed by Ludwig Dettmann. Liebermann and Dettmann knew each other from Berlin, where they had founded the Berlin Secession Artist Group in rejection of the conservative Berlin Academy. Under the guidance of Dettmann, the impressionistic style of painting emerged as the prevailing technique taught in Königsberg. Dettmann facilitated the arrival of many young educators to Königsberg, who imparted essential craft and technical skills to their students. These skills were primarily developed through nature studies, with a particular emphasis on figure studies. During the period from 1909 to 1913, Fritz Ascher obtained a comprehensive formal education. His studies from the period are male and female model studies, still lifes, or drawings of plaster models. The posthumous profile bust of Franz Skabina was probably created in the plaster and natural drawing class of Otto Reichert. Skabina had taught Dettmann at the Berlin Art Academy, and they both were, together with Max Liebermann, founding members of the Berlin Secession. As part of the education, students were asked to paint portraits of themselves and of each other. In 1912, Edward Bischoff painted a portrait of Fritz Ascher, and around the same time, Fritz Ascher created a self-portrait. 30 years later, the two fellow students were in very different life situations. While Fritz Ascher was persecuted by the German Nazis as a Jew, Edward Bischoff enjoyed a successful career. In 1944, was nominated for Hitler's list of so-called God-gifted artists who were exempt from forced labor and military service because of their importance to the National Socialist cultural establishment. Since 1913, Ascher has established himself as a freelance artist in Berlin, alongside his former classmates and friends, Franz Domscheit and Arthur Degner. In his absence, the city had become the center of expressionist art. Ascher was very sociable, popular, and became part of the expressionist avant-garde. At the same time, he received guidance from Lovis Corinne, probably in his private painting school. There, Ascher met artists such as Jakob Steinhardt and Ludwig Meitner. In 1912, they had founded the artist group The Pathetics, together with Richard Jantur. The name said it all. It was about passion and empathy. In early sketches and drawings, the artist critically and humorously captured Berlin society and the spirit of the times. These sketches often resemble caricatures. In his work, Semitic and Aryan prototypes, military officers and representatives of the upper middle class, industrialists and workers, German Jews and Jews who fled to Germany from pogroms in Eastern Europe stand opposite each other, reflecting the increasing political and social polarization within German society. On the right, we see a drawing of a funeral from 1919, which depicts a conflict within the Jewish community. A crowd gathers in front of a round hole reminiscent of an urn burial. The person standing behind the grave appears to give an eulogy. Lightly sketched crosses in the background confirm the site as a Christian cemetery. In the left foreground, a man raises his hands to his head in terror or pain and looks at the crowd. His head, coat, and side locks identify him as a religious Eastern European Jew. He seems shocked by the Christian burial of a Jewish citizen, possibly a family member. Since the 1880s, Eastern European Jews came to Berlin in large numbers, fleeing pogroms and massacres. Their religiosity, traditional clothing, and poverty created tensions with the assimilated German Jews. In 1914, World War I broke out. Many of Ascher's contemporaries went to war with almost religious feelings for their fatherland, while Ascher was deferred until 1916. The artist now created his most important early works, in which he confronts us with his highly idiosyncratic pictorial interpretations of mystical and religious content, but also mythological, literary, and historical themes. They show him as a deep thinker and spiritual seeker. His interest in mythology, occult ideas, and ideological colors was in line with the avant-garde circles around him. Ascher now found his very own visual language, in which he combined expressive lines and intense colors with descriptive contours and a flat application of color. He often depicts his figures naked in an undefined space, thus separating them from a specific time and a defined place. This suggests that he depicts archetypes that formulate something universally valid through non-naturalistic ideological colors. In a second thematic group, the artist reflects on the events of Golgotha, Judas' betrayal, which led to the crucifixion of Jesus, and the devoted love of the former prostitute Mary Magdalene. In several sheets, the artist thinks about the placement of the three crosses and the arrangement of some key figures known from the Gospels and a centuries-old pictorial tradition. The old man with the walking stick pointing to the crucified Christ, Mary Magdalene clutching his legs, or the mounted soldier with a lance who will later pierce Jesus' side. In these drawings, Ascher largely follows traditional Christian iconography, although in the pencil drawing at the bottom right, the individuals disappear in a large crowd of spectators. We also see the dynamization of individual figures, particularly of the rider on the right. In the painting, dated 1915, the crucifixion scene has been moved to the very top of the picture, and most of the space is taken up by the crowd of people who are watching the event. Soldiers on horseback are holding the crowd back. Only on the right side of the picture is one with a lance and a rearing horse driving the people towards the viewer. Some of the figures depicted are exaggerated in a caricature-like manner. This expressionistic dynamism is further enhanced by the use of colors. Fritz Ascher uses strong complementary and light-dark contrasts. Is this actually a religious painting, or rather a parable of the war that is breaking out over humanity? The mounted soldiers prominently depicted in the images resemble Mars, the Roman god of war, as he advances towards the crowd with a drawn lance. In this context, we can here identify Mary Magdalene in complete devotion towards Jesus. Long flowing hair and the depiction as a semi-nude with bare breasts are a traditional reference to Mary Magdalene's past as a sinner or prostitute. In both works, Jesus is depicted with yellow skin, a color that was a color of ostracism in the Middle Ages, representing disgust, disease, and shame. Prostitutes, Jews, and heretics had to wear yellow marks as a symbol of shame. By 1916, World War I had become a global conflict, with fighting taking place across Europe and the colonies in the Middle East, Africa, the Pacific, and parts of Asia, with no end in sight. The initial enthusiasm of the German population had given way to general war weariness. In this explosive mid-war period, Fritz Ascher was called to service and served in the 1st Reserve Battalion of the 26th Infantry Regiment in Magdeburg from October 13, 1916. The biggest battles of the war were fought at that time at Verdun, where almost 300,000 people died, and on the Somme, more than 1 million people died there. Ascher is a musketeer, that is, a simple soldier without rank, who belonged to the so-called line infantry, meaning the bulk of the combat troops on foot. After only 2 months, on December 23, 1916, Ascher was admitted to an auxiliary hospital with a heart condition. 2 months later, on February 12, 1917, he returned to his battalion. On July 27, 1918, while the war was still going on, Ascher attended the wedding of his sister Charlotte to the 13 years older Max Prindl. A family photo taken at the wedding shows the 25-year-old in the background on the right with a short military-style haircut. It was the same year in which the so-called November Revolution ushered in the end of the First World War. After 4 bloody years of war, the empire and the military had lost the trust of the population, and barracks, town halls, and castles were stormed across the country, and the old rulers were disposed of. Fritz Ascher recorded the political and social unrest in Berlin and depicted the violent street fights of the divided workers' movements. Ascher revisits the theme of the crucifixion, now emphasizing the emotional responses elicited by this event. The figure studies presented here show Mary Magdalene, who, within the Christian pictorial tradition, openly expresses her anguish over the death of the crucified Christ. On January 19, 1919, Germany's first government was democratically elected with a voter turnout of around 83% and sworn in on February 13. The November Revolution was brutally suppressed. After the founding of the Weimar Republic, Berlin developed into an incomparable European city where culture flourished like never before and nowhere else. Ascher experiences during the war are not known. Unlike contemporaries Otto Dix or George Grosz, His known artworks do not directly reference what he witnessed. Instead, his let me see, did I skip? Yeah, there we go. Instead, his fleeing figure on the left looks at us with a face contorted with fear. And in the figure scene on the right, we see the same central figure in a group of men fleeing in panic, stripped of all possessions or clothing. The Dionysian now seems to be omnipresent in Ascher's work. His people are on the run. Are these works metaphors of what he experienced in the war? Are they visions of what was to come for him and all Jews in Germany and Europe? Or are they metaphors of an individual's internal struggle for self-improvement? Christian iconography in Ascher's work often serves as a narrative support. If one understands Ascher's colors as symbolic expressions of an inner psychological struggle, these works are about the pursuit of personal improvement in order to live in harmony with the universe. Many of the drawings created before 1933 seem to show Ascher's reflections on compositional concepts for monumental paintings. Since a large part of Ascher's works fell victim to a bombing raid in the last days of the war, this can only be proven in a few cases. Among the drawings shown today, we find three such groups of works: the studies of Bajazzo and artists, shown at the beginning, the studies of Golgotha, and now the studies for the monumental painting, The Tormented. All three are titles chosen by the artist, a rarity in itself. In all three studies shown here, the central figure is beset from all sides. Is he fighting against eternal threats, external threats, against external constraints, or do we see him fighting with himself? The monumental painting, The Tormented, features 5 brightly colored nudes, tightly framed and dominating an enigmatic blackened landscape punctured by colorful lines and dots. At the center is a male figure in blue with red-orange hair. He is tied with a rope and held by 4 figures: an older red-orange skinned bearded man in the lower left foreground, a younger yellow-skinned man with red hair, a seductive purple-skinned woman with green hair, and a slightly menacing green-skinned woman with red hair in the lower right foreground. One possible interpretation sees the central figure's inner struggles as a quest to realize this ideal, spiritual potential, amidst the conflicting forces of destructive impulses. The central male figure, able to break the bonds that hold him physically but not emotionally, is blue, the color of religious fervor, divinity, spirituality. His tormentors then include uncontrollable anger or passion, with the color of red. His intellect, yellow, keeps him from realizing his spiritual ideal. The purple woman, as desire and devotion, is a distraction whispering in his ear. The slightly threatening, monstrous woman on the right shows the peaceful balance of green threatened or tempered by red passion. The fact that people of various ages and genders represent the central male figure shows the link between Ascher's color choices and a symbolic color scheme. In the theosophically inspired art, the universe duality is often shown through the balance of male and female energies. The left sheet from 1921 shows a figure similar to the central figure in The Tormented. Ascher's figure is depicted in profile with a raised head and a determined stride. He follows traditional depictions of John the Baptist in the wilderness, dressed in camel hair robe and guided by divine light as he moves through a forest. In Christianity, John the Baptist is seen as a prophet of the end times and a key forerunner of Jesus. Since the early 20th century, many artists and thinkers have depicted prophets as important figures for spiritual guidance and innovation. Ascher also aspired to lead a spiritual life. The ink drawing created in It's the one on the right side. The ink drawing on the right side, created in 1921, which Ascher calls spiritualization, could be a self-portrait. At the beginning of the year in which Fritz Ascher celebrated his 40th birthday, on January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler was elected Chancellor of the Reich. Immediately after the signing of the Reich Enabling Act by Reich President von Hindenburg in March 1933, Hitler and the NSDAP assumed absolute power. The police and Gestapo persecuted, tortured, and killed the regime's opponents, using lists that had been drawn up long before. Among them were many artists and intellectuals. Ascher constantly changed his place of residence, first in Berlin and later in Potsdam. Branded as degenerate artist and a full Jew under the Nuremberg race laws, Fritz Ascher was no longer able to work as an artist after 1933. During the night of the November pogroms in 1938, he was deported to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, released shortly afterward, and re-imprisoned in the Potsdam Gestapo prison. He was not allowed to take a boat trip to the safety of Shanghai. His release under strict reporting requirements on May 15, 1939, was followed by uncertain years in a boarding house. From November 19, 1941, like all Jews, he had to wear the yellow star. In June 1942, Ascher narrowly escaped his impending deportation because he was warned by a police sergeant, Heinrich Wolber, and was hidden and fed by his friend's mother, Martha Grassmann, in the basement of her apartment at Lassenstraße 26 in Berlin. The Grassmanns lived in the Grunewald Villa colony, where stately villas stood on large plots of land, often hidden from view by old trees. Many Jewish artists, publishers, intellectuals, and politicians had lived in the neighborhood. However, since 1933, more and more of these Jewish residents were driven out of their homes, and important Nazi institutions and high-ranking Nazi officials moved in. Nearby was the Grunewald train station, from which the mass deportation of Berlin's Jews had begun on October 18, 1941. Hunger, immobility, and loneliness, as well as the constant fear of betrayal, discovery, and death, characterized his years in hiding. Without books, artistic work, or human contact, Ascher was completely thrown back on himself and his educational horizons. It was during this time that he wrote his poems, which read like a reflection of his feelings and inner states of mind. After, he also turned to a new theme. Many poems invoke nature as a place of refuge and spiritual home. After the capitulation of Germany in 1945, Fritz Ascher was one of about 5,000 Jews who had survived in Germany in hiding. About 1,700 of them survived in Berlin. 12 years of persecution changed his personality, his life, and also his art. The artist moved in with Martha Grassmann at Bismarck Allee 26, just a short walk from his former hiding place. She looked after him for the rest of his life. He began to paint again. At first, he reworked existing works, often with a pointillism of expressive color. But soon he turned completely away from his earlier figurative compositions. People now mostly appear as head studies, drawn from memory with ink or gouache on paper. Ascher turned to nature, which he experienced in the nearby Grunewald, which is the largest city forest in Berlin. He was finally able to paint the motifs he had imagined in poems. Like most other Jews in Germany, he lived a largely withdrawn life from society. He refused to teach. periods of intense work were interrupted by periods of deep despair. After a successful exhibition of 30 paintings at the Buchholz Gallery in Berlin in May 1946, he refused to take part in any solo or group exhibition for 25 years. In 1969, just a month before his death, the legendary Berlin gallery owner Rudolf Springer showed the artist's work in a major solo exhibition. Staying true to his expressionist sensibility, the artist used bright colors and intense brushstrokes. He worked with new immediacy and urgency, dramatically simplifying forms and means. Trees and flowers often fill the entire picture plane. In powerful images of suns, flowers, and trees, Ascher was preoccupied with his own habitat. His thick, bright pigments suggest both vibrant, life-affirming joy and, in the roughness of his brushstrokes, a dark inner anguish transformed into light. Painting became an affirmation of his own existence, and the paintings became partners in confidence, even a substitute for his lost home, his spirituality, and physically devastated hometown Berlin. Alone or in groups, trees stand like monuments in their landscape. Young trees bear witness to the rapid reforestation of the Grunewald at the end of the 1940s. These trees appear exposed to the elements, fragile and full of tension in relation to nature and to each other. They become standing figures that confront us, each as distinctive as each individual. Old trees with heavy trunks that have survived many storms and seasons fill the entire picture area. These are the ancient pines and oaks for which the Grunewald is known. The work on the right is Ascher's last dated painting from 1968. Between the massive trees, a vast landscape opens up and meets a cloudy sky on the horizon. At the end of 1969, the villa at Bismarckallee 26 was sold for demolition, and Fritz Ascher and Martha Grassmann had to move. He died just 3 months later, on March 26, 1970. Martha Grassmann died shortly afterwards. She's one of 651 Germans recognized by Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations, out of 27,921 people as of January 1st, 2022, which is the last number published. Ascher's works on paper before 1933 are featured in the exhibition Love and Betrayal, the expressionist Fritz Ascher from New York Private Collections, which are co-curated with Dr. Jutta Götzmann, Executive Director of the Museums of the City of Freiburg. You can still catch it this weekend if you are in Germany or close by. I also invite you to register for our free bi-weekly online events, in which we tell stories of artists whose life and art were impacted by the German Nazi terror regime 1933 to 1945. Most of them are not known to the larger public. We record the events and upload them on YouTube, where you can watch them on our Fritz Ascher Society channel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was utterly amazing. We are so appreciative of all of that. We do have some time, and I would like to ask you a couple follow-up questions. We just saw a tremendous amount of work. I think you gave truly a remarkable summary of just the breadth of work that Fritz Ascher created, not only as a painter, but also as a poet, which is an interesting component to his career as well. But there's a term you used early in your description of him in relation to his persecution by the Nazis. And that was that his work was considered degenerate art. And of course, that's the Nazis' terminology for it. What exactly does that mean? And was there anything specific that the Nazis looked for that qualified in their eyes as degenerate?
So degenerate art was the art that Hitler did not approve, and but there was in fact a very big fight within the party, because there were parts of the party like the expressionist art, especially Emil Nolde, really tried very hard to become the German artist. And but basically Hitler didn't like that art. He wanted to be trained as an artist, was rejected, but created early in his life a lot of landscape drawings and paintings in a very, very traditional way. And that was the art that he promoted. And that became the official German art, Nazi art. So everybody, so the expressionist art that was created were the enemies. That was the art that was rejected, and actually rejected in a very aggressive way. So all Jews belonged to that. They couldn't create art anyway. They were outcasts anyway. But also, like all expressionists, everybody who was creating really the modern painting of its time. And degenerate art is really in the correct, taken in the correct sense, is really only the art that was, and that was a decision by Hitler, to take out this art from all public collections. So in a very hasty, very short time period, the Nazis went through all public collections and took the expressionist art out and Jewish art out, and they created exhibitions. Not only one, but the most famous one was in Munich, and displayed the art, but didn't display it in a pleasant way. They kind of hang, with comments about the art. It was also art about Negroes, about called black people who brought jazz music to Berlin, which was very, very popular in Weimar, Berlin. So that was all not accepted by the Nazi regime. They created an exhibition showing this art, we hate this art. And basically across the street, there was a house of German art was built, and there they displayed the art that was the new state art. But the truth is, actually, first of all, it was so hasty that some artists were in both shows because they kind of didn't double check. And the truth is that there were long lines of people trying to see the degenerate art exhibitions, but not so much for the official art of the Nazis. So because it was mediocre, very traditional, and yeah, so
thank you.
That's degenerate art. Yeah.
No, I mean, Ascher's life is utterly fascinating. I mean, you mentioned that he was arrested as part of the November pogrom. He spent 6 months at Sachsenhausen and the Gestapo police. Upon his release, can you explain to people how he then survived during the war? Because it's really an extraordinary story in terms of where he lived and just was it? Would you say it was more cunning than luck, or sort of a combination of both that allowed him to survive the horrors of what was befalling in World War II?
I mean, it was definitely luck, right? Because many people who weren't able to get out of the country tried to save their lives by hiding, and had to do all kinds of things to find hiding places and survive this situation in hiding. Yeah, that was definitely luck. It was also, I mean, he came out, he had to, I said he had to register, but the truth is he had to go to the local police office 3 times a week. That means every second day. And once a month he had to go to the Gestapo, to the Gestapo office. So he was, heavily controlled, and he had to move to a building. There were no ghettos in the cities in Berlin, not in Berlin either. Jews were put into they used to call them Jew houses, where you could only move there. You couldn't rent a regular apartment because people were not allowed to rent to Jews. In his case, it wasn't possible to prove it was a Jew house, but it was definitely someone who accepted him into the building. So it was hard already to find a legal place to stay. But then the deportation started, and I think because he had to go to the local police office so often, and because the police, the police were a structure that was there when the Nazis took over. So they were given the new orders of conduct, but they didn't necessarily, they didn't have a Nazi, they weren't necessarily Nazi members or agreed to what was happening to the country. So, and I think that explains why this policeman, Heinrich Wolber, just told Fritz Ascher, don't come back, never, I don't want to ever see you again. And he saved him from deportation by doing that. And actually from the paperwork, we know that Fritz Ascher wasn't the only one who he did that. And those people were able to, figure out what their next move was, and they just didn't run into a trap. And he was lucky to have a family where the son was a lawyer who helped him get out of the concentration camp and the police prison, and the mother was a friend of his mother, and she had Fritz Ascher's mother had asked her to please, help my son, take care of him, and so he went to her, and she stood by her word, and she hid him and in the cellar. And of course she had to invite other, involve other people as well, because everyone had food stamps, so you couldn't feed an extra person on your own food stamps. So you needed to find enough food for everyone to survive, and it's also were a lot of bomb attacks, and as you saw the photo, this was a building that was hit by a bomb, but not many, very few in that neighborhood were bombed, because it was the buildings stood far apart from each other, and so for the Allies who came to Berlin and bombed Berlin, it was much better to go into the center of the city, much more effective to drop a bomb there. So, but if there was a bomb alarm, every neighbor from the building came into the basement, so he had to be hidden, in a hidden part of the basement, so nobody would know that he was hiding there. And of course he had to be always quiet and could never leave the house or never leave the cellar. And there were at some point 2 other Jews hidden by Martha Grossman, and they actually couldn't stand that anymore. So they went out for a walk and never came back. So yes, it was luck, but it was also a huge discipline on his part to, don't go insane and just be very disciplined to stay where he was and without going crazy. And because I think even though he was brought food and whatever, it was were very short times that people were able to stay with him. So, and 3 years is a really long time to be isolated like that. So I admire his strength and also the people who risked their lives by hiding him.
Yet another fascinating component of who he was as a person. I do have to say thank you to you, Rachel, and I want to reiterate that thank you, because that is every comment that we have right now in our chat. Is just a list of people thanking you for everything that you're doing, for bringing Fritz Ascher to us and bringing him to life. And I really do appreciate it. I think what we could do to sort of bring this to a close is, in a more general sense, with your wealth of experience and knowledge, what do you feel, or how do you feel that the study of art, particularly someone like Fritz Ascher, who was among the ostracized and persecuted, how do you feel that contributes to the growing field of Holocaust education? What do students benefit? What do they gain from learning about such artists?
I think it's a very different access to his story, because you learn about his story through the art, and you see his art, and you learn more about his personality, really, what he cared about, and of course you learn his life story, and you see not every artist's artworks change that drastically because of the experiences, and every personality is different, and every survival story or every life story is different. But I think it's very enriching to connect to the artwork and come in through that, because you come in through emotions, basically, and through learning who he was as an artist, by learning what kind of art he created. And there's a whole, so I think that's very important. And there's a whole art historical aspect that I care very much about, because Hitler wanted to erase not the Jews altogether from the planet, and certainly made a big effort. For him, cultural expression was very important, and so he wanted to completely erase the voices that he didn't agree with. And so in the mainstream art historical cultural story, artists who had this persecution story are usually not included. And I find it very, very important. Like now in this time, it's a wonderful thing that we're trying to discover, that we're trying to think about, the groups whose stories haven't been told, right? Who have been neglected by, we try to diversify the historical stories that are being told. And so I try that in this very little piece, like in that very, very focused, very small group to, breathe some life into these artists and make make people aware that they lived, that they created, that they were there, and commemorate their life story and their art, and celebrate the art.
Well, you do what you do brilliantly, and it was a real honor to host you today. So once again, if anybody wants to go to Germany for the weekend, they can go and check out the exhibit. But also, of course, you're also centered in New York City. So that could be a little bit easier for people to get to. Now, can they just come and visit the Fritz Ascher Society in the city? Do you have designated hours, specific exhibits? What if someone is a little bit closer to NYC than, say, Germany, what should they know?
So we don't have a gallery. We are we don't have a collection. We purely are an educational organization. But we do organize, we have this virtual event series. We have a newsletter that you can sign on to, and we also, I will let you know when there's an exhibition that we have in the New York area, which is coming up in a bit. So yes.
Outstanding. So yes, please sign up for the newsletter. Stay on top of everything that Rachel is doing as part of the Fritz Ascher Society, as well as please sign up, subscribe to the St. Elizabeth University YouTube page. Stay on top of everything that we are doing here at St. E, both with the Holocaust and Genocide Education Center and the university in general. Always, always, always an honor to have people join us and learn, and it's always wonderful to learn from true experts in the field. So thank you, Rachel. Enjoy the conclusion to the exhibit this weekend, and safe travels back to the States.
Thank you so much, Richard. And you took my last words. I wanted to also point out to the people who came from, from my audience that you're doing amazing work, and to, sign up to your events and become part of your incredible events. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for thank you for this opportunity to present Fritz Ascher and his work, and all the best to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.